jack of all trades, master of none. And this is what I learned from John. Be the sharpest knife in the kitchen rather than all the utensils in the drawer. Think about that. Be the sharpest knife in the kitchen. You have a sharp knife in your kitchen. You want to cut something, you want to carve a ham, you want to carve a nice prime rib. You know what knife you're going to before you ever walk in the kitchen. Now, you go to eat that thing, you go to the utensil drawer, you just grab a fork. Is it a special fork? Maybe not, it's just a fork. Be the sharpest knife, not all the utensils in the drawer. And that taught me so much insecurity. Josh, I can never do what you do. I don't want to try to. I'm just going to be, you go be your knife.
Yeah.
I'll be a buck knife, you be a Benchmade. Whatever, dude. And I think there's a lot of growth in that self-awareness and that understanding who you are is, I talked about this the other day. It's funny how it comes up. I was talking to a buddy, and my team ended up making a reel about it. Jake Thompson, who spoke at my event, discussed this. And I remember exactly where I was sitting in traffic when this came to me, right in downtown Spokane. The only race you'll ever lose, is when you try to run someone else's. Try to beat every utensil in the drawer. Dude, you're just another fork, another spoon. Be that knife that come a holiday, you're like, that's the knife I want. When you go home and cut whatever, vegetables to steaks, that's the knife I'm grabbing. It's reliable, it's sharp, it's gonna do this specific job. And learning that from John probably did more to affect my life than anything else.
This is Sparta!
Welcome back to Spartan Leadership. I'm your host, Josh Kosnick, and we are a leader-to-leader podcast where we're trying to inspire and bring as much impact to this world as possible. Today will be no different because I got my friend Tyler Dickerhoof on the line all the way from Spokane, Washington, where it is not snowing, but it is currently snowing in Madison, Wisconsin, as we sit here the week before Christmas. So we will enjoy the white Christmas here. But let me introduce you all to Tyler real briefly. So Tyler is an accomplished leader, an amazing leader. If you're not following him, we'll give you those social media stuff in the notes as well. Where to follow, I'll ask him later. Entrepreneur and coach who has built businesses generating over $500 million in sales. When I emphasize that. He's also the host of the Impact Driven Leader podcast, which I had the privilege of being on recently, and a member of the John Maxwell Network Marketing Advisory Council. So Tyler's passion, you guys are going to hear this a lot today, creating self-aware, impact-driven leaders who align with their personal growth with their professional success. And I can't wait to dive in more on that. Tyler, welcome to the show, brother.
Glad to be here. Glad to be on the other side of this table. I wish you were sitting here where at least it's warm. I think I look up at 68 degrees. I got my t-shirt on. But man, I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah, I got this nice warmer in here. We'll see if it gets warm enough for us. This heater, it's an electric one. I'll use it sometimes hunting. But yeah, the heat in the studio did go out. So we're working on that as we speak.
Just tough it out, man. You're good.
We're toughing it out. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, we will deal with it. I got my hunting pants on, my ugly snowshoes on, so we'll deal with it.
You're good.
Good to go. So excited to dive into this all with you today. And I thought we'd start with, you phrased this briefly, and I want to say you called yourself a know-it-all leader and have transitioned that to being authentic and vulnerable. And those are two of my favorite words in leadership. So dive into a little bit of your past and what made you call yourself that know-it-all leader and now coming so strongly forward into your authenticity and vulnerability.
It was really born out of, what I've understood now was an insecurity of trying to prove myself. It was, when I was younger, growing up on a farm in Ohio, a Midwestern kid and trying to fit in, and often in places where I didn't fit in. At middle school years, we moved and it's like, how could I fit in? And quickly it became as like what I knew. Pretty smart. So I could get by with that. It's, whatever I knew. And eventually I just relied on that, whether getting into business, whether it's starting my own business, working with clients and, progressing forward was always based upon what I knew until it didn't work, and it doesn't work. And it was really through a lot of pain, a lot of heartache, a lot of reflection and, I would say trying to develop self-awareness that I realized, that was the crutch that I relied on to build connections, relationships. And it works great at first. If you can add value to people, connect with them, it's great until they get fed up with it and annoyed by it. And I think we're in a lot of professional avenues, especially getting promotions, man, if you're the guy that knows it all and performs, a lot of times they'll promote you. It's not good for anyone. It's not good for you because you don't learn the lessons of relationships. Now, you can be high woo. I'm an Enneagram 8. I'm a challenger. Woo's not what I go to, but yet I learned the painful way that what I knew was not adding value to people. It was who I was. It was the genuine compassion that I had my heart to serve that was really adding value. And so through a lot of soul searching, a lot of God speaking to me, a lot of like, hey, there's a better way to do this, realizing, man, I need to come to grips with who I am and be okay to be that authentic me. But part of the reason and what I do within my own community and when I speak and when I talk to people is it's great to say, hey, Josh, let's be authentic and vulnerable. All right. I would think most people would realize at this point, being authentic and vulnerable is probably a good thing. Mm-hmm. What I have understood and what I try to talk to people about is there's a reason why you're not, or you think you are, but you're really not. And so I like to go into that place and say, why aren't we? And for me, it was my insecurity of what value do I have? What worth do I have? And it was really coming to grips with that and understanding how my insecurity showed up, that this entire transformation occurred where I started to speak. I started to, coach differently. I started to show up differently, and people were like, oh, I like this guy. I put up with that other guy. I like this guy. And so that's kind of what I would say, all of that in a nutshell.
On average, 22 American veterans are taking their own life every single day, and we find that to be unacceptable. These men and women fought all over the world in some of the harshest conditions for our country, made it home, and come home without a mission, a purpose, and without a lot of support from our government, and are left to die. Again, we find that unacceptable. And unfortunately, our government isn't taking this problem seriously enough, or certainly aren't acting quickly enough to save our brave Americans. However, there are some amazing charities that are taking action, and we want to come alongside them to help be their fundraising arm. So we're excited to announce Spartan Valor Foundation. At Spartan Valor, we're taking the guesswork. We are taking the decision fatigue away from you because there are thousands, if not millions, of charities out there. We wanted to take that decision fatigue away and give you a spot and confidence that you know that these dollars are getting right to where they need to do the work that we need to do to save these brave American veterans. Our mission, should you choose to accept, is to find 100 ambassadors that are willing to find 100 people to contribute $100. Our goal in the first year is to raise that $1 million. And on Veterans Day 2025, we want to donate that $1 million entirely to 4 highly qualified charities that we've pre-vetted. And I know you might be right on board with this mission, and you might be excited to get started. But I want you to hold on to that checkbook just a little bit. Right now, we're looking for ambassadors. Ambassadors that choose to accept the mission and find other Americans that believe in this cause, this great cause, to save more American veteran lives. So if you're one of those people that want to raise their hand to be an ambassador, we're looking for you. In January 2025, we will start accepting donations. So hold on to that checkbook just a little longer. If any of you want to learn more, please visit SpartanValor.org. You can see the great work that we're about to do, the community we're about to build, and the mission we're going to embark on together to save our American veterans. Again, go to SpartanValor.org. Was there a moment, because I know you're really big into self-development, just like me.
Yeah.
Was there a moment that just slapped you in the face and be like, I got to change?
Yeah. It was a culmination of moments, but it was really the end of 2016, going into 2017. And I was looking for a mentor. I'd never really had a mentor in my life. I just kind of, I'd had bosses, I had business development managers, I had peers, but no one that I could look to and say, man, I like what you're doing. I want to, model myself in some ways after you. And I really, at 36, 37, realized it's probably a good time to do this, right? And that's when I wrote down my goals for the year: find a mentor. And, that's when I started to read a lot more, because I realized what I was doing wasn't working. And I kind of fell into a situation where I ended up joining a John Maxwell community called the Executive Circle, which was primarily for corporate executives. I, at that point, was an entrepreneur, owned my own business, involved in network marketing. I'm like, that's where I want to be. I don't want to be with those other people. They're weird. I don't want to operate like that. I want to be corporate CEO in that community so I can learn and glean, because I want to have bigger businesses. I want to serve people in bigger businesses. And that was when I transformed like magic. Like, I'll even say this. I was driving with my wife. Was it Tuesday night? A couple days ago. Yesterday. Yeah, a couple days ago. And we were going to a basketball game. And we were talking about things and talking about just a situation that I'm working through right now. And she made this comment. She said, you've spent so much work, and John Maxwell poured so much into you, believed in you. And I know you've done that. Rely on that, meaning don't try to push beyond it. Like, go back and understand what he's done in you. That's your opportunity to do for others, and not kind of go back to what I was in the past. And so that was really the catalyst for me, because we had businesses, we had success, but yet everything was hard and painful. Not because the journey, is easy, but because every relationship was painful and difficult, and there was always this tension in interaction. I'm like, this is not the way to go about life.
Yeah. In fact, as you say that, or I should say, as your wife said that to you, I literally put this in my notes today, and this is just how God works, right?
Yeah.
Attaches things. So don't ever let your attachment to the past be greater than your commitment to the future.
Love it. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's seemingly exactly what your wife was saying to you Tuesday night.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it was as much for me hey, you've done the work. You have transformed, and her in a way of acknowledging that, and in a, whether I understand now, like, proud of the work, but it's like, don't go back and be the asshole that you were. And that was quite simply what I heard. It's like, someone believed in you and helped you grow and transform. Don't forsake all that just thinking that you need to be a righteous a-hole again.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and we need that. We need people. And this is one of the things that I talk about within my community, talk about here, is we need people that sit across from us, like you and me here, that say, hey, Josh, this is what I see. Because so often people say this in coaching, in businesses, hey, look in the mirror. All right, you and I are on Zoom. If you read my letters, you can read that IDL, right? If I'm looking in the mirror, it's backwards. It's not legible. Well, this is what I understood, is when we look in the mirror, we see our intentions. We see the nice guy that says hi to everyone, that is cordial, that'll do anything for anyone. The person sitting across the window, they don't see that guy. They see your actions. They see what really shows up. They see what they feel. And if we're too busy looking in the mirror and saying, yeah, that guy's a good guy, he does everything right, and not through the window, dude, we're going to make some major mistakes. And we're going to just absolutely have devastating train wrecks. And I think that's the cautionary tale here is, going back to that know-it-all, that person that was trying so hard to prove himself. And I just need to open up that ball of clay and let God form that. and be willing to sit across the table from guys like you and say, hey, what do you see?
Yeah, that's so good, dude. I think that's how a path to self-righteousness is, when we judge others for their actions and ourselves by our intentions.
100%.
Because then we only see the good that we intend to do, but aren't necessarily acting upon. And we need what you're saying, that mirror, those truth tellers, to be able to tell us when we're acting out of accordance with our values.
Let me take this description a step further. We've all kind of maybe heard this in business, right? You know, one of the classic, complaints about accountants is they drive down the road looking in the rearview mirror, right? Oh, let's look at our business 6 months ago and make decisions going forward. And it doesn't work like that, right? You got to look at the windshield. No different here, right? If we're looking in that mirror, looking at me, oh, I'm good, and we're not looking through the windshield, all of a sudden, that's when we drive, hit things. Well, here's another description of that. I know Wisconsin has some not as big of mosquitoes as Minnesota, but you guys got some bugs. I've been there. Yeah. And just imagine you're driving down the road. It's in the spring. It's in the summer. And you start to get a few bugs that hit your windshield. Hey, that happens. I have a little difficult conversation with someone that I work with. That's a bug on the windshield. Oh, I go over here and, there's another bug. It's just all these bugs. And if we don't go to the gas station and clean off our window by saying, hey, Josh, this is what happened with Bob. Tell me what you see. If we don't do that, we don't clean the window, eventually our window gets so dirty. The only way to look forward is looking in the mirror. And guess what happens then? Bam, we hit something and life comes to a stop. I know you've been through it. I've been through it. And then all of a sudden, it's really bad. It's really bad when either you go through the windshield or something hits the windshield, because now you're trying to correct what everyone sees of you because it's all these broken shards of glass. There's one step further. And from our conversation, I'm guessing there was a period of it. For me, it happened. It happened the day before Thanksgiving in 2008 when I lost a client who represented 25% of my business. And that's when the mirror shattered. See, it was one thing for the window to get all mucked up and to get cracks in it. I didn't see that. I said, no, it's them, not me. But then all of a sudden my mirror cracked. And I was like, oh. And the problem is when you don't have people around you that are supporting you, if you're not building those people in that look through the window and say, hey, this is what I see. I see the good and the bad. Then all of a sudden when your mirror cracks, you're lost. For me, the confidence was in the tank. Like, what value do I have? How can I add value to anyone? And it took me several years. It took going to another career. It took, trying to grab a hold of, my wife's business success and saying, hey, I have success in this too. Trying to prove my value and say, hey, I do have value. And those were a lot of the symptoms until I got to the point where I was able to sit around a table doing a 360 review when they said, hey, the problem is you. Your window's dirty. You need to clean your window. And what they said when I did a 360 review is everything's about you. So that's not me. Like, I don't have, if I go to my goals, like, I don't have a lot of personal goals. I have goals to serve people. I have goals to do things with my family. I have goals to, create a life that we enjoy, but I don't have like, man, I'm going to hit this goal. That's just not me. Do I have goals for those that I lead, my team? Absolutely. And what everyone was telling me is it's all about you. And that's when I need to go and say, ooh, why is this happening? What's going on?
Yeah, and we can mask a lot of our goals around others. Internally, it's about us. And I think that a lot of people fall into that trap is, oh, I'm about others. But when you break it down to what it's really about, we're masking that, no, that's really about you. And I think that's where you're saying, like, the mentor and the people around you, putting those people around you that are truth tellers is really crucial so that you don't, because you may have the best of intentions. Again, going back to judging ourselves from our intentions, that we want to make it about others, but we end up setting goals that on the surface look like it's about others, but really it's about either feeding our ego, our pockets, or something else that's about us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it happens for so many leaders. It's kind of the virtuous, ego of, I'm doing this for others. Like, really? Because here's what I've realized is, and this is a little bit about your insecurities. Everyone knows when your insecurity shows up. They just don't know what it is. Meaning how you act to people are like, oh, okay, I get it. I had a conversation with a guy a couple of weeks ago, and we were in this conversation, and he kind of asked, "What do you want?" I said, "I want to feel like you care." And his response was, "Don't challenge my manhood." And I'm like, whoa, okay, that's not where I went. But what I realized is, I hit the hot button. I hit the hot button on his insecurity that he has been accused or questioned. Do you care? And it's like, it wasn't about me that day, but it was about me because I pushed the button. But it's also, that can happen for me. That happened to be the circumstance. My wife was saying, hey, don't go back on what you learned. Okay. Case in point. But it's often when those things show up that others recognize, where it takes someone that is a lot of humility, coming back to that authentic vulnerability. It's like, that's not what I intended. I have to own that. And I have to say, hey, excuse me, I'm sorry. That is not what I intended. Let's put this back on me. This is on my shoulders because I made you feel out of place, or I created this situation. I'm going to take all ownership. Yeah, there's probably some ownership for you in every relationship, but I'm going to take ownership here and say, I'm going to be that person to start and go. And if you come to it, great. If not, no problem. Because there's someone that modeled that for us. And that was Jesus. Say, hey, I'm going to put it on me. You guys, kind of model, follow. It's like, that stuff's not beyond us. But it's being humble enough to say, yep, I screwed up. Okay, how do we make this right? Yeah.
That's unbelievable. I want to go back to your mentor piece, though, because I know there's a lot of people that seek or are having an epiphany that they need a mentor in their life. They don't know where to look. I find it awesome that you shot for the moon with yours. I mean, in getting John Maxwell in your life. I love that you thought big enough there to go, hey, who's the greatest mentor possibly walking this earth right now? And go for John Maxwell. So let's say someone doesn't feel like they're worthy or doesn't feel like they're capable of getting in John Maxwell's circle, but they really need a mentor, or maybe they need someone that's industry specific. What are your criteria, or how did you go about looking for a mentor when you had that epiphany?
Yeah. Well, there's God in that story. The first person I thought of was Craig Rochelle. Reached out to him, and he wasn't taking, mentees at that point. It's like, okay, great, fine. Just reaching out to people that I knew that I kind of aligned with. There's another individual that I was going to join one of his masterminds, and went through the process with them. And my wife was saying, I don't trust that person. I don't think so. And I could say today, if I had joined that mastermind, I'd probably have made a lot more money, but I wouldn't be the person I am today. Absolutely not. No way, no how. And so that was kind of the beginning of the year, January. Kind of keep praying about it, bring it up with my wife. And she sees an Instagram advertisement, July of 2017. Instagram, just kind of, Instagram is not a big thing at that point. Scrolling through it, and it's like, yeah, okay, this Maxwell program, never heard about it. At that point, to be honest, I'd only read a couple of John's books. I trust him. I knew it. I'd been at an event when he spoke. I kind of like that guy. So we join it. We go to the event, and people are in his community are just like John's people, like caring about you and connecting. It's like, how did you guys get here? It's like, oh, we saw an ad on Instagram. And they look at us like, we don't do ads on Instagram. Well, that's how we found out. Well, and they start asking around. No one knows, has no idea. No one ever put on the ad. That's how I got to John. And then got in the room.
Did you screenshot it or something?
I know. I mean, it was one of those things we didn't think was a big deal. Yeah. Right. Until they're like, we have no idea who did this. right? Maybe it was an intern one day, just like, hey, let's try it. Okay, whatever. But that was all me just being provident and saying, I want this. And what I learned in that, and the difference between the person that I went down the path and was this close to signing to be a part of their mastermind compared to spending time with John over the last 7 years and a lot of intimate time, almost 8 now, values. So when you seek a mentor, I would personally, don't worry about what profession. Don't worry about their success. Because I think when you start pursuing the values that are important to you or that you want to have someone else speak into you, all those other things will show up. If you focus on the values, if you focus on learning, growing, putting others first, communicating, leading, you will find the person. And again, praying for that instead of like, oh, and this is just my perspective, right? Maybe different. I think in too many cases in coaching, and I know you do a lot of coaching for financial advisors, so don't take this the wrong way, right? But I think too often some coaches focus so much on an industry that they miss what they can learn from others. And that's not absolute. Don't get me wrong. It's not absolute, right? My background is from agriculture. I was a nutritionist for dairy cows. About half my community is from that industry. Why? Because that's long-term relationship. The other half is all sorts of different industries, and I love it. You know why I love it? In my opinion, I don't care if you're a personal trainer, a financial advisor, a medical professional. You're all working with people. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those different situations, like one of the people in my community who we talk a lot about and learn so much about people, he owns a trucking business. He has, 17 different trucks that are on the road all over the country delivering bird seed. You want to talk about a people business? Trucking business is a people business. They're sitting behind the wheel, delivering to people, unloading to people that are going to buy it. And so coming back to, again, how did I get to John? It was all about values. Hey, this is what I value. And it led me down this path. Now, for me, that was the start. I also understand, hey, do I need maybe some people in my life that, can help me stretch in my coaching or speaking or, other business? Yeah. I think there's a place to go seek those because you want to learn more. But for me, mentors can come from anywhere if our values, and I appreciate their expressed values. Hopefully I'm not belaboring that to confuse listeners or go too much. But as I look back, and again, I would have joined one, I probably would have made a boatload of money. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today because I wouldn't be the person. I probably still wouldn't be married. Instead, I chose a path with a guy that I came to find out eventually our values so aligned. And it helped me grow internally to express the things that God taught me to express through my different experiences. That's why I get to do what I do today.
Yeah, I love that answer. The only thing I'd add is that they're chapters ahead of you or down the road a little bit further than you. Yeah. That's a big key is like, okay, because I think we're best equipped to help the previous versions of ourselves.
Yep.
And so if we can align those values, and you just happen to be a few chapters ahead of me, that's someone I can really align with, listen to, and then take it 10 steps further, hopefully.
Yeah. One of the things that this helps me. And I think in those relationships, it makes them really enjoyable. Some of my best mentors are also people that look to me for inspiration too. Because of, whatever different pathway in life. And so the idea that, a mentor is going to have, 15 boxes checked and they're going to be the supreme. I don't believe in that. Right. But also I understand I can't be that for someone else either, but I can help in a few areas. And, there's a certain point to where I say this in my community. Hey, I'm only here to learn as much from others as I hope to be able to add value to them. Because that to me is the whole process. Like, what are you experiencing that I can learn from to add on top of what I learned? And those relationships again, are transformative. I believe that's when growth happens, is when people are sitting around a table and they're sharing their perspective, their experiences, and all of those things are just layering together. That's when you learn the most. That's when you transform.
You said something really key in there that I don't want people to miss, is that all mentors aren't going to have all 15 boxes checked or whatever amount of boxes.
Yeah.
So for example, let's use John Maxwell real quick, because we've been talking about him.
Yeah.
Tyler is in ridiculous shape. I'm so I'm going to pay you a compliment, because people always say that about me. Tyler's a beast. And so let's use this example.
Yeah.
I'm not going to speak for you, but I'm going to say for me, I don't want to look like John Maxwell when I'm 70 something. I'd prefer to look like Bobby
if John
Kennedy.
were sitting here beside us, he'd say, guys, don't look like me when you're 77 either. Right. And you're exactly right. That's not an area where he has, he admit that's a struggle. That's not an area that he understands as a problem, especially after, traumatic heart attack. But yet that's not an area where I'm looking for John for inspiration. But they're still inspiring, because the dude's 77 and he runs, I know you spent a little time, dude runs a marathon of a clip. And I understand why.
Always running. And now we're not talking about literally running. We're talking about his schedule. Running.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing to be around John, and the days are, till midnight, up at 5 and let's go again. And I understand why. I've been in those environments with him, and the work that he does to inspire, to encourage, to uplift, to just believe in people. And when you're in that as a community, when that's your day, dude, it's invigorating.
Yeah.
I've been through it enough to know it's not we're dealing with this problem. Yeah, we get to grow. We're dealing with this problem. We're making an impact. And it's such a different perspective, but it not to take away from what you were saying, but yeah, that's not a priority, John. John will be the first one. And this is a great lesson that I learned from John. Phenomenal lesson. I don't remember exactly which book, but I was reading one of his books, and he talked about his son had picked him up at the airport in Atlanta, and they were driving somewhere, and he got him something to eat. So, got some fast food, food, whatever. And so John's sitting in the passenger seat, he's eating this food, and he drops his fork. So he asks his son to pull over so that way he can find the fork. In the process of doing that, he had his briefcase sitting in between his legs. So he took his briefcase and set it outside the door, found the fork, shut the door, drove off. All of a sudden, like 10, 15 minutes later, he's like, I don't have my briefcase. In the entire manuscript, so John writes out all of his books longhand on like a legal pad and then gives it to his writer. That entire manuscript was in that briefcase. So he calls his assistant, Linda, and said, hey, this is where I left it, whatever. She ends up not finding it there, but somehow, some way, someone had found it, and it was at the police station. The entire manuscript. This is what I learned from John. You can be as brilliant as him in regards to relationships and leadership and be an absolute Mr. Magoo. And this is the lesson I learned that day. I grew up on a farm. I grew up, if you didn't know how to weld, if you didn't know how to plumb, if you didn't know how to be an electrician, if you didn't know how to be a veterinarian, if you didn't know how to be an accountant, you couldn't survive. It was a, jack of all trades, master of none. And this is what I learned from John. Be the sharpest knife in the kitchen rather than all the utensils in the drawer. Think about that. Be the sharpest knife in the kitchen. You have a sharp knife in your kitchen. You want to cut something. You want to carve a ham. You want to carve a nice prime rib. You know what knife you're going to before you ever walk in the kitchen. Now, you go to eat that thing, you go to the utensil drawer, you just grab a fork. Is it a special fork? Maybe not. It's just a fork. Be the sharpest knife. Not all the utensils in the drawer. And that taught me so much in security. Josh, I can never do what you do. I don't want to try to be. I'm just going to be a knife. You go be your knife.
Yep.
I'll be a buck knife. You be a Benchmade. I mean, whatever, dude. Like, and I think there's a lot of growth in that self-awareness and that understanding who you are is. I talked about this the other day. It's funny how it comes up. I was talking to a buddy. My team ended up making a reel about it. Jake Thompson, who spoke at my event, discussed this. And I remember exactly where I was sitting in traffic when this came to me, right in downtown Spokane. The only race you'll ever lose, the only race you will ever lose is when you try to run someone else's. Right. Try to be every utensil in the drawer. Dude, you're just another fork, another spoon. Be that knife. Be that knife that, come a holiday, people are like, that's the knife I want. When you go home and cut whatever, vegetables to steaks, that's the knife I'm grabbing. It's reliable. It's sharp. It's going to do this specific job. And learning that from John probably did more to affect my life than anything else.
Well, it's so good because people have also heard the terminology of like the riches are in the niches. It's because when you've niched down to a spot that you are that sharpest blade, people know exactly who they're going to when they have that need. Yeah.
And, unfortunately, there's a good friend of mine who gave me a knife several years ago. His name is John Rulin. John passed away back in August. John was with Cutco and learned so much from the guy and so grateful he was in my life. And I have a knife from him. And I know if I want a sharp knife, that's the knife I go to. Now, do I use it every day? No. Well, that's all right. When I need it and know where to go, I go get it. And, I think it's important to be okay with that. And so often I think we get frustrated or, sometimes people will tell kids, it's like, well, you got to diversify, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. That's tough because it can keep you from sometimes chasing a path that you shouldn't chase. But man, go chase that path. Because here's what I've learned is sometimes by chasing that path, you will learn so much that the path that you chased ends up being the person that you once were in order to serve the people that you can serve. And I think we do ourselves a disservice sometimes by saying that. I remember several years ago, my son was he played pretty high level soccer and he was at a Olympic development program event in Denver. And he was just talking about the coach and how the coach just beat up on everyone. And, they're talking about, who wants to play in college, who wants to do this or that. And, he goes, well, 99% of you will never. Like, why do that to a bunch of 12-year-olds? Like, what do you have to gain from that? Because if you go look at some of the professional athletes, they weren't necessarily at those camps. They weren't the stars at those camps. You know why they're professional athletes? Because they were a special knife. And their makeup and their utility and their drive to just pursue was beyond that of anyone else.
Yep.
The great Wayne Gretzky quote, greatest hockey players don't play in the NHL. The greatest hockey players that make everyone else around them great, that's who plays in the NHL. That's life. And I think that's, in this conversation, how do you get there? You get there by appreciating what you are and not what you're trying to be. It's like, how do you show up to others?
Yep. And so the eggs and all in one basket, diversification, that is great since I come from this world. Great investment advice, not necessarily great life advice like Tyler was mentioning here. Yeah. And a lot, you hear that a lot. Like a lot of times people take platitudes or advice from one sector and try and transpose it into a different sector of life, and they don't play in all sectors.
One of the things for me is I always thought I wasn't a creative person. It's just, I'm not artistic. Man, you tell me to draw something, it's going to look like a stick figure at best. That's me. That's what I got. And so I always thought, oh, I'm not creative, not creative. Then I learned about true creativity. Creativity is seeing what others can't with something that is. And I've had friends in, like my business now as in later, I mentioned, I love bringing a bunch of different industries together and facilitating conversation and drawing all the connections wherever it's like, how did we get here and how did you make those connections? I love that. I love thinking outside the box. I love, here's the box, here's the way it's done. Great. I'm going to look for every possible way outside of it to get it done. Well, I grew up with that because I had to growing up on a farm. That's how I survived. And I think one of the things that I've learned from that is what you just said is if you understand the principles, man, then you can apply that other places. But if you try to have the same strategy everywhere, it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. But what are the principles? What are the interactions? What are the relationships? What are the connections? If you understand those, then you can look for other ways to apply them. And I think that's where people get in trouble, as you said, is like, oh, I'm just going to carbon copy this from one to the other. And like, why didn't it succeed? Well, you went from investing in high-tech stocks to over here to, whatever else, and you try to use the same strategy. It's not going to work because the principles and the dynamics are different. It's kind of like right now where I look at it, it's like, I did a little bit of trading, commodity trading. I worked for a company where we advised farmers on commodity markets, cash markets. And one of the great lessons I learned there is like, it doesn't always go straight up. It doesn't always go straight up. It's going to come down. What goes up comes down. It's like, you have to understand, appreciate that. So if we're looking today, it's like, we've had the stock market, craze over the last year, up 25%. And there's people you and I both know that are maybe young in their career. They didn't experience 08. They're like, man, it's always been straight up. Okay. Best of luck. Yep, doesn't mean it's all going to be bad. No. There'll be opportunity, but don't get blinded by, again, what works here is always going to work there. No, it isn't.
That's absolutely right. And yeah, if you're in it long enough, you're going to see plenty of ebbs and flows.
And I had a friend the other day share, life's a roller coaster. And the only way you lose at that is when you get off. Mm-hmm. Just hold on. Just go for the ride. Be willing to throw your hands in the air and just say, let's go. And
one of the biggest areas, one of the biggest areas that people, the quote unquote getting off, part of that is getting off and playing the victim.
Oh yeah.
And that's where I see a lot of culture getting to because they get attention on social media, which is a quick dopamine hit when they play the victim. And then they continue to try and bleed that well. And going back to that well instead of riding out the roller coaster analogy that you mentioned and getting back up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you and I talked when you were on my podcast, we talked about the book Hero on a Mission.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you had a chance to get it yet.
Maybe I was just on a podcast a week ago. Give me a little bit of time.
All right, dude, come on. I just, this is what it is. I know you read books. Maybe it's the next book. Maybe
it's going to be the next one in the Book and Bourbon Club. I'll tell you. It's on the list.
All right. But one of the things that Donald Miller, the author, talks about is the victim, the villain, the hero, and the guide. And, we all have circumstances to be the victim. We all have circumstances to be the villain. And it takes someone with a lot of self-awareness and drive and desire to be the hero. I'm not going to be the victim. I'm not going to be the villain. I'm going to be the hero. I'm going to be the hero for myself and others. And then ultimately it becomes the guide. And so every great story, every great movie has those four characters in some way, shape, or fashion. And I think as you bring up, kind of talking about this, if we get off the roller coaster and choose to be the victim, then we didn't go through the ride to get to the end. We're like, man, that was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's what the hero does. But even beyond the hero is the guide, as you know, and part of me for understanding leading isn't about getting back to those goals and I'll make the goals so I look good, but they're really other people's goals. That's you're trying to be the hero of your own story. It'll never happen. You're the hero in someone else's story, and you get to be the hero in someone else's story by being the guide and, helping them get there. And I think, as we look through life, we come back to the mentorship. The great opportunity in mentorship is to be the guide to someone else's hero.
Yeah. So thinking about impact is one of our favorite words.
Yeah.
What does impact mean to you?
Oh, it's really consolidation of things we've talked about in that very last one. It's about making a difference to make a difference in people's lives, not because it looks good on me. It's being driven to say, I'm going to be a catalyst. As Brad Lomenick describes it, a catalyst leaves no residue of themselves. Being so willing to be impactful where I don't need to be the one up on stage to be able to applaud you for being up there or someone else to be up there or to be about so much different. I don't need the recognition and the kudos. I don't need my name in lights. It isn't about that. And really, to me, it's about playing out and living in empathy. I define empathy as putting your arms around someone and walking with them. To be impactful is to be empathetic. Is I'm going to put my arms around you and we're going to walk together. And when I look at that and from the center of it, and it comes back to what you said in the very beginning, when it's all about you, you're not really worried about impact. You're worried about you. And when you make it about others and what happens in their life, what happens in their development, what happens in their growth, that's impact. Mm-hmm. I believe this is when you do that and do that well, and you have a great life. You leave a great legacy. And so it's really centering on that idea. It's not about me, because it really isn't. But man, it can't happen without you. But it's not about you.
Yeah, that's such a good last statement, because it can't happen without you. Yeah. You are part of that impact. You're a part of paying it forward. You're a part of going back and helping the previous version of yourself.
You know, it's Jim Collins' Good to Great, right? You know, the level 5 leader, the leader that, no, it's not about me, but man, I got to help make this happen. I got to help make sure that it goes. And, you know, too often in leaders, and I believe it's insecurity that keeps people from getting there. They either make it about themselves or they're like, I don't know how to deal with this. I don't want to grow because, again, I don't want to clean off my windshield. So I'm just going to go and I'm happy driving down the road looking in the mirror. It's all right. Honestly, you can drive a lot of country roads. You can drive pretty far doing that. Okay. Doesn't mean it's right. At some point, somehow, it's going to fail. And I think that is, you know, all of this is understanding, okay, what does it mean to be that level 5, that pinnacle leader? It's being impactful. It's understand I'm not perfect. I still have to grow. I can accept my, you know, foibles. I can accept when my wife, you know, says, don't sink back to be the asshole. Okay. All right.
That's humility. That's good. I want to switch gears before we run out of time on the self-awareness side of things.
Yeah.
I have 2 questions on this. I don't know which one I want to answer or ask first. So I'm going to go with the one that I really wanted to ask you. What is it about self-awareness that brings up insecurities in others, that makes others that aren't? So let's say, because you're very self-aware, I'm very self-aware. Sometimes that just scares the shit out of someone that's insecure.
I'd actually refer to something Mr. Maxwell told me. We're incapable of being self-aware. Even the idea to think that we're self-aware is a blind spot. It's not possible. So I take from him expressing that and going back to the window and the mirror. We can never see ourselves on the other side of the window. We can only ever see the mirror. Now, in some cases, the mirror and the window look pretty much the same, right? A little bit of different, not that big a deal. And I think that's one of the things that I've had to, you know, come to grips and accept was like, all right, we can strive to be self-aware, meaning that we can have awareness of ourselves, awareness of what shows up. For me, it's very much, and this is a lot of my content, it's understanding how our insecurities show up. So I'm just refining this piece of my kind of content teaching. It's something that'll be a part of my book some point in the next 12 months, whenever we get it done. But it's what I refer to as the 4 walls of insecurity. So I believe our insecurity builds walls around us. And what I've seen in life and what I've experienced is those walls end up creating a barrier between us and others. And the first wall that I find is isolation. Hey, I'm just going to go hide in the corner. You know, you go into a room, a social room, let's say you go to an event meeting, right, whatever, and you're like, I don't want to put myself out there. I'm just going to go hide in the corner. I'm just going to go isolate. Why? Because I don't feel like I'm good enough to be in the room. My insecurity is saying you're not good enough. And someone else comes to you is like, dude, you're the top performer. What do you mean? People like you. Of course. No, I'm just introverted. No, I believe it's isolation from our insecurity. And again, that awareness says, no, I'm good to just sit in the corner. I don't need to go out there. And see, that's a lie of our insecurity. The next one is inactivity. And this shows up in a lot of workplaces, right? You need to have a crucial conversation with someone. Or in a sales point of view, it's like, hey, you need to follow up on that account that wasn't so great last time, but you know, you got to follow up with them. And you're like, oh, maybe it'll take care of itself, right? Maybe that complaint, that dispute, it'll just work itself out. To me, that's the wall of inactivity. And in leadership, it's like, you know what? They'll figure out this isn't the place for them. Instead of saying, hey, Josh, do you like it here? This is, you know, I want you to be a part of the team. Do you want to be a part of the team? Like having those crucial conversations, right? The next one is insensitivity. So we've had walls of isolation, walls of inactivity. Third wall is insensitivity. And we saw this a lot during COVID, right? Hey, I don't care what you're dealing with. Be in the office. Mm-hmm. I don't care that, you know, your family lives an hour away because that's where you're able to get childcare. And actually you don't want to live in an apartment, you know, cramped in there, 5 people all day long. Get your butt in the office, right? That played out so many cases. That's insensitive. Hey, you know, your wife's having a tough time postpartum. I don't care. There's clients that need to be served, right? Those type of things. That's the insensitive leader. That's another wall. And here's the fourth wall. Intensity. See, intensity is a blinder. It's also a bulldozer. Intensity was my go-to. I have elements of all 4, right? I mean, it's a house. You're going to have walls, all 4. But intensity was that lack of awareness that I thought I was aware. I'm just pushing because I'm driven, right? And intensity is a bulldozer. It'll move mountains, absolutely. But it leaves carnage. It just leaves wreckage all around you because you just push right through people. Mm. And let me share you how I learned that, because I find so many people don't learn it. You know, intensity, another example, intensity is like my studio lights, like your light, right? If I'm asleep, it's 3 a.m, and my kids walk in and turn on the bedroom lights. It's like, just make it go away. These studio lights, they're not blinding me. But if I had them turned on at 3 a.m, that'd be offensive. It's a time and place. That's intensity. I don't know if I shared this story with you when we spoke. I don't think so. I don't know if you learned it. I mentioned I grew up on a farm. Mm-hmm. Grew up on a dairy farm in Ohio. My parents, my sister, and I. And one of my jobs as the oldest son, a lot of times was, you know, getting all the equipment ready to bale hay in the summer. And it was right after my freshman year of high school. It was the beginning of June, and we had a bunch of hay, a bunch of grass to bale. And so my job on that day was to just get all the wagons, all the equipment, everything greased up, tires filled with air, make sure it's ready to go. Because we got, like, I don't know, 80 acres to bale. And like, let's go. And it was about 4:30 in the afternoon, and I'm trying to back a wagon. You've tried to back a hay wagon, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's not easy.
Did it this past summer multiple times.
Yeah, there's a trick to it. It's really not easy when you're trying to do it uphill. And I was trying to do that as a 14-year-old. It just didn't work. So trying to back it up wasn't working. So I decided to loop around on the driveway and come from up above, downhill into the shop. And so as I did that, I looked ahead on the driveway and I look over to my left and there's a grass area that goes to our house. And I see my little brother, Joel, and he's out playing there and I wave and I proceed to drive around. And when I get to the top of the hill, I look back where I drove from. He's there laying on the ground. I drove over him, killed him. Called emergency personnel. Kind of the next piece of the story is I'm talking to the sheriff. He's sitting on the hood of his car. I'm standing up in front of him. I'm not very big. I'm only like at that point, 5'7", just a little 14-year-old. He's asked me questions. He's asked me what happened, what this, that. I'm like, I'm done. Done answering your questions. Said, I'm going to go in that barn and I'm going to milk those cows because they're not going to milk themselves. And if you want to ask me any more questions, then you can come in there. Other than that, we're done. And I share that story because that's the moment that I can go back and relate to, that I used intensity to get through life. I put my head down and I pushed. I'm done. I'm going in there. I'm going to do a job because I know the job needs to be done and I can do it. And I had God reveal that to me about 7 years ago when we were dealing with just a normal, employee situation. We owned a gym and just employee, like, hey, time off, not time off, just normal. Hey, let's communicate, just business stuff, right? Nothing major. And I just get done working out. I sit down on the bench. I start drinking my protein shake. And I hear God say, this is how you deal with things. This is how you deal with things. And see how I was dealing with that instance is how I dealt with it when I was 14. Like it or leave it, I'm putting my head down and pushing. You're either with me or not. If you're not, fine. There was no empathy. There was no appreciation for what they were going through or their perspectives. It was, I'm going to be intense and I'm going to push. And so for me, and I realized that was just an expression of my insecurity. Because for me to be vulnerable and slow down and be empathetic and say, hey, I don't have the answers. How can we work through this? Like, tell me what's going on. Like, let's work at this together. What am I not doing right? And so what I've learned from other people that were gym members and friends, and they were like, dude, you were just so intense that we're like, dude, what's this dude's deal? Like, oh, you're successful. Great. I mean, okay. But I was just standoffish because I was trying to constantly prove myself and protect myself. Because going back to what I dealt with when I was younger, and when all of a sudden you get through a situation because you're intense, and in a lot of businesses, it's applauded. Oh, they're intense. They're driven. They're going to accomplish a lot. Until there's an absolute smashed windshield and their mirror is broken.
Yeah. Well, I got to say two things. One is, before Tyler shared that very vulnerable story, he gave you a master class and a preview to his book before the world even gets to see it. So I hope you all took those 4 walls to heart and can actually learn from those. Now, the story with your brother, I actually didn't know that. And my heart was breaking as you were telling it. And the question that came to mind is, how have you done with empathy for yourself? Because I think that's the hardest one. Like, you can learn to have empathy for others because that's human. I think the hardest person to have empathy for is ourselves. And especially, if your 14-year-old self, like, that's a unbelievably traumatic event.
It's vulnerability, authentic vulnerability. Because this is something that God has shared with me. Again, I tell you about John, total God thing. Like any of this, God telling me this is how you deal with things. God telling me when I'm sitting at a stop sign, bringing my home from my son home from soccer practice saying, your brother's life had purpose. This is what you're going to go do, is to sit here and tell you about his life. I wouldn't be here if that wouldn't have happened. His life had purpose. His life will serve someone because they're dealing with intensity and don't realize it's just a wall to their insecurity. And they just need to realize, hey, it's okay. Just be vulnerable. See, one of the other things that I learned is, I think I said this earlier, I define empathy as putting your arms around someone and walking with them. And there's two main caveats to that. One is a faith thing. Don't be unequally yoked. If you've ever seen oxen wear a yoke, it's on both of them. And what happens if one walks faster than the other? It chokes both of them out. It doesn't work. Empathy is a two-way street. If I put my arm around you, the only way for it to work is if I'm vulnerable. And that means I can't be empathetic to someone else and not have empathy for myself. It's just not possible. What's the solution through that? It's vulnerability. Hey, yeah, I'm dealing with stuff too. You know, I'm going to be open and vulnerable. I don't know how to get through this, but you know what? I know two is stronger than one. We'll get through this. I need to rely on you just as much as you need to rely on me. And the vulnerability piece comes in from a friend of mine who shared me a story about the Navy SEALs. I said, he had him on the podcast one day, and I said, hey, how do the SEALs get through, bud? Like, how do they make it through? He goes, oh, that's easy. I'm like, okay, do tell. And he goes, they don't try to do it on their own. All right, note taken. Thank you. See, what he was saying is, you know, you can try to strong arm it and get it through yourself. It's like, I don't need anybody else. I can do this. They don't want you. There's a guy really popular for kind of expressing all of that in life. None of the SEALs appreciate the guy because they're like, you're not one of us. You're not. You may have made it through your third time, but we don't really, you're not one of our guys.
Yeah, now, you ask any of them. Either any former special forces, you ask any of them, that is not someone that they will speak highly of.
Not at all. And there's a reason why. And it's like, you try to get it through on your own, you're not going to survive. The only way to get through it, you're laying in the surf, the water's pounding on you, it's cold as hell. The only way for you to survive is to link arms with the guy beside you, to link arms with the person, the woman, whoever beside you. It's the only way you'll survive. Because the friend that told me about this story. They're in Afghanistan, sitting on top of a ridge. They're waiting for an exfil. They got 12 hours. The enemy is surrounding them. They're at the top of the ridge. They're dug in and they're just waiting it out. And all of a sudden he hears over his mic, hey, Captain, you good? You need anything? You got ammo? You got water? Everything good? And all of a sudden everyone starts cracking. Hey, everyone good? That's empathy. That's vulnerability. That's what allows you to thrive and survive. You'll never do it on your own. One goes fast, many go far. So coming back to that point about empathy, and I had to learn it, right? And these are stories how I learned it. It's like, don't be unequally yoked. Well, you put your arm around someone and you can drag them, but it's not going to work. And they can drag you. It's not going to work. It's when you go together. Here's another story. Have you ever read the poem Footprints in the Sand?
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
That's an example of Jesus being empathetic. You should think about it. We're walking together. I got my arm around you. You got your arm around me. And all of a sudden, I get punched square between the eyes. What do? You hold me up. All of a sudden, you go around a little bit farther in life. You know, there's 2 steps, 4 footprints. You go through something tough. Hey, I got you. Right? It's the same thing. It's the model of empathy is you can't do it alone. And it's that vulnerability of like, hey, all I am is the sharpest knife in the drawer. That's all I am. And it's enough. And my sharp knife and your sharp knife, dude, we're good. But it's the fallacy of the isolation. I just need to back away. I can handle all this on my own. It's the fallacy of, dude, it'll take care of itself. It'll all play out. They'll eventually just leave. It's the fallacy of being insensitive. Like, I don't care your problem. Just do the freaking job. Or I'm just going to push myself and push everyone else. And if you don't like to get pushed, then I don't like you, and see it. Because that person would have taught you the greatest lesson. Hey, care about everyone. Everyone's a sharp knife. Everyone. Sometimes they just don't know it.
Yes. Amen. That last point he was making on the yoke and the fallacy of trying to do it on your own with isolation. The thing that came immediately to mind, because I've worked on this over the years as well, is a lot of times we'll go home with the weight of the world on our shoulders, and our spouse will want to be there to help. And we don't want to necessarily put that on them. We try to own it.
Yeah.
We try to isolate. We try to not share the problem because we in our heads, we're thinking we don't want to burden them with it.
Well,
the fact of the matter is that they want to help. They want to put their arm around you. And us as men tend to isolate and not share that burden.
You want to hear my version of that?
Yeah.
My wife tried to share it with me. She tried to tell me, she tried to look in my window and help me clean off the bugs. And I didn't want to hear it because I didn't want to own it. So we stopped sharing because we don't want to go to the gas station where the guy comes up and clean your windows because it takes too much time. It's like, no, the window's fine. Right. And that's a part of what you're saying is the person close to us, our spouse. When we open up and listen to them, it's like when I was driving in the car. Right? I go back 15 years ago and I'm like, here she is. She's trying to beat up on me again. It's all my fault. Right. She just wants to tear me down. No, to your point exactly. No, they're there to go with you. They're there to walk with you, be open with them, listen to them. And that can be our spouse. That can be our friends. That can be our coworkers. That can be anyone if we just take the time.
That's
but for
right.
me, I didn't do that. That's why I had to learn the lesson the really, really hard way.
Yeah. So how about you guys take this advice from both Tyler and I, not learn the hard way? That's what we're here for.
Oh, man. But that's the roller coaster.
Yeah, I know.
That's the, clinching on the rails like, yeah.
I used to, in training, I used to ask this question at the beginning of each training, and it was kind of a tee up. What is the best way to learn? And I gave them two options: on your own or from others. And then we'd have a debate.
Yeah.
And I would then reveal to them that it was a flawed question. And after they got done debating each other, and the reason being is because the best way typically to learn is actually on your own, but the most efficient way to learn is through others.
It takes both.
It takes both. And so it's a flawed question, but that's whereas if you can efficiently learn through others and hopefully avoid some of the pitfalls, that is a definitely efficient way. But sometimes we need to do it the hard way. Hey, we got to wrap this up. It's as much as I don't want to. Where can everyone follow you?
Yeah. So the easiest place, go to YouTube, Impact Driven Leader, Tyler Dickerhoof. Look for me, bald, shiny head, probably in a black shirt. Just because I get big sweaty arms. Pits. And so it's the shirt, man. It's the shirt. Yeah. So YouTube, would love and appreciate, subscribe, and as well listen to my podcast available on YouTube, but also Spotify, Apple iTunes, wherever you listen to podcasts, the Impact Driven Leader podcast. So, yeah.
And I'll also say this, Tyler's a hell of a speaker, hell of a leader. So drop him a follow. And I actually haven't asked this enough, so I can't say I always do. I know you got impact from this episode. Drop Tyler a message. Tell him what the biggest takeaway for you was, or leave it in our comments as we're posting these reels, because he dropped a lot of knowledge, some very vulnerable stories to really let this sink in and how the lessons in his life have shaped who he is today. So drop those comments. Our guests always appreciate to hear what you're learning, what you're taking away, and how you're going to apply it to your life. Can't thank you enough for being here, spending the time with the audience.
Thank you. My pleasure. Appreciate you. Appreciate getting to know you even more, Josh, and look forward to more in the future.
That's right. I even saw one of your cattle rolling by the window.
Were they rolling around back there?
One of them was, I saw.
Yeah, it'll be a burger in about a month. So
get some good steak out of that. I appreciate it. Spartan.
Absolutely.
You know what to do. Share this episode far and wide. Remember that good and great are the enemies of possible. Lead like a Spartan today.